William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Thank you, Ms. Daniel. Okay, our final, and I thank all of you for your patience in getting to this point. Obviously, you're here for the final item. That is the Development Code Amendment. If you'll read it into the record, Ms. Moorman.
Next item is DCA 156-009. Consideration of amending Chapters 51 and 51A of the Dallas Development Code to create a new zoning overlay called Late Hours Overlay. Staff recommendation is approval.
Thank you, Ms. Moorman. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we have a lot of folks who will be interested in speaking. I trust that not all of you want to speak. However, if you do, we will find a way to hear you. But could I just see a show of hands as to numbers of folks who want to speak in support? Okay. And could I see a show of hands numbers in opposition? Okay. 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 I think what I'd like to do is allocate, given the fact that we have had prior public input on this matter, we have also received numerous pieces of correspondence, which we very much appreciate, by the way. I think what I'd like to do is allocate 30 minutes to each side, starting with those folks in support and then folks in opposition. You do not need to take the entire 30 minutes. I would ask that as many of you as we can accommodate in that time, just be conscious of trying not to do a Me Too presentation. If you have a different point that someone hasn't already made, please come and share it with us. And so with that said, folks who are here in support, if you would like to speak. And if others of you want to speak, in order to avoid the lapse of time of waiting, you might want to come down and sort of make a queue. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ms. Tarpley and the rest of you, I'd like to speak in support, which is to say...
Could you give us your name and address first, please?
My name is William Gruben, G-R-U-B-E-N, and I live at 2416 Worthington, which is relevant here because I live less than 2 blocks from McKinney Avenue, which is to say, in Uptown. So I would like to have the late hour overlay approved because of changes that we've had in the neighborhood since I moved here in 2003. And what has happened is we have gone from a neighborhood with by and large very quiet restaurants to a neighborhood with rather largely very loud bars. And as part of that issue, what has happened is the bars have expanded their outside tables, which in many cases we did not have at the time of the restaurant, and accordingly, it seems reasonable to expect some requirements that would demand more parking spaces. And in particular, this has been a problem for people in my neighborhood because even though we now have some residential parking permits, they are only sporadically enforced, and so we have mammoth amounts of drunks. At least I haven't done a breathalyzer, but they're rather loud, arguing as they go down my street and slamming doors, which they open right across, right by my house, so I know they're violating that. And generally causing a public nuisance. And I would like to address the standard arguments that are offered on the other side, since I know they'll come up again. The first issue that is often raised is the idea that, well, most of the people in the neighborhood go to these restaurants, and so as a result of this heavy clientele from the general area, the idea of having additional parking spaces is rather shaky. Now, I have not surveyed all of the people in my neighborhood, but I have gone to Yelp, a source I love to go to when I want to see evaluations of bars and restaurants. So what I'm going to do is pick the two that are closest to me, which are Tate's and Trophy Room. So as far as the issue of locals going to Trophy Room, let me quote a last year's Yelp saying about
excuse me, if I could, let me suggest that I think it's best that we not focus on specific establishments. We're talking about a policy that is going to be applied citywide. So I think it is preferable to we are not here to put on trial in any way, shape, or form particular establishments. If you want to discuss, generally speaking, trends you've seen, that would be terrific.
Okay, so the essential issue here is essentially we need more parking spaces. We need more parking spaces on the one hand because we have more space where there are tables. We also we need more parking spaces for the simple reason that we're having a lot of people parking in the neighborhood when if there was more parking elsewhere, then they would not be parking in our neighborhood and shouting at each other at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so that's an important issue for my neighbors and me. The second issue, again, is that it isn't simply that they're allowed, there are more people out there. And in particular during the fall and spring, since a lot of the people who come are students. I don't know what else to say about that, with the exception that some people here will argue that they create jobs by having these bars. And I worked as a regional economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas for more than 2 decades, and I also have taught urban economics at SMU. And so I'd like to say that what creates jobs are typically, at least the standard wisdom as going back even to the 1930s, is that who creates jobs are institutions that export services or goods from, let's say, the Dallas area to someplace else. So that would include Texas Instruments for goods, and it would include, let's say, American Airlines for services, and there are plenty of other operations. We call these other industries, like bars, ancillary industries. From that perspective, they don't create jobs. What they do is they follow along. If Amazon comes here, for example, they'll be exporting, and there'll be people who work for Amazon that'll be going to bars. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you for spending time with us. I appreciate it. And stay close by in case anyone should have questions for you later. Thank you. Got it. Okay. Anyone in opposition to the late hours overlay, please come forward. And I gather a number of you were interested in speaking. Please just come and sort of form a queue so that we can go through more
Dallas
efficiently.
Cosham, 900 Jackson Street. I guess I'm the leadoff batter. I will say, I think you can tell from the audience. I mean, I know we had a large number of servers that were here earlier. I know they feel like, I mean, one of our clients that is in Oak Lawn has 150 wait staff members, just that. I mean, and I can think of several other venues that are that way. So I know you've heard some really good testimony from people in the past who never come down here for any other reason that I think has been really compelling, that this is how they pay to go to school. So a lot of them had to leave. But, I think that one of the biggest issues here is if there are problems, with a particular or a few particular operators, then the city has a method to deal with those people, and it happens routinely. And, all the bars, restaurant, service operators, they don't want bad operators to be out there either. That doesn't look good for all the businesses that are mostly good operators. But it seems like that, a lot of the talk is there's a problem here or there. Well, we're also focused on the donut shop that opens at 5 a.m. and all the hotels that are open. This just seems to be, and it's been a case of you have a lot of people who have continued to show up and have from across the industry. It's not just the bar operators. I'd ask that you follow what ZOAC has done. Y'all have done a good job of looking at this, and there are certainly other methods. And I know the Restaurant Association, individual operators, have told you they're happy to continue to work with the City of Dallas to address problems as they occur and remedy those problems. But there's no need to catch the restaurants that stay open late, because rarely are people upset about restaurants per se. Some of those are open late, but I won't belabor the point. We have a lot of speakers that are interested, but this doesn't seem to be a citywide provision that has widespread support like many others. And in fact, I think you've seen that, the crowd has been like today. A lot of people opposed and a very few people in favor. So I'd submit that doesn't make good public policy. I often end up on zoning cases on the other end of that, where I might have a good project that should be in the mythical land of somewhere else. And because it just doesn't fit with what citizens had in mind. So in this instance, you got a broad group of citizens that don't think this is good public policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Good afternoon. Oh, and I thank you for the yellow card, and to the extent all the rest of you have filled them out, thank you. To the extent you haven't yet, still time to do it.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all of your patience in keeping us here today. My name is Lauren Santagati. I own 2 bars on McKinney Avenue, Fat Rabbit and Mask, and we're opening our 3rd in January, Chirco in the One Uptown building. If I can just address the gentleman that was before me saying that we have non-jobs. We certainly pay those taxes like they're non-jobs, and they certainly put a lot of people through school. But not only am I a business owner, I'm also a resident in the St. Thomas area, and I'm also a member of the Uptown Hospitality Association. So I came here before you today to try to be the common voice and show you the positive impact that our industry does. The reason why the UHA was developed was to listen to the feedback and find a better solution. And in the short period of time that the UHA has existed, we've donated $50,000 to the Dallas Police Department. Our donation also helped fix the street lights that were out, improve the landscaping, and we've also implemented early morning street cleanups on Saturday mornings. I allocate alone over $100,000 a year just in security and off-duty officers. Recently, Fat Rabbit was just awarded the Excellence Award from the city as an example to what a bar should be like. So it is confusing why we are even here today if we're going to get an award last month and now we're asking to stay open. Some of the magic that has happened in our industry and what we're really about that nobody talks to the homeowners about is what we've donated just to charities alone. Just this quarter, we've donated to Helping Our Heroes. We've donated to the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center. Our donation alone will help 2,000 children in your city have a Christmas this year that weren't planning on it. If you look under the definition of McKinney Avenue, Google uses the word vibrant. Business owners from all over the United States consider just that word when we're investing into a city. It took my group personally 6 years to research where we're going to put a Michelin star restaurant, in which we chose your city to put Chirco by Le Cirque. During our construction phase, which we are in now, I've applied for a permit to put an $867,000 retractable roof that will be soundproof on the 2nd floor to help with the noise, in which I was denied. We chose Dallas and McKinney Avenue just because of the vibrancy that it has. But if you take that away, economically, the homeowners also need to look at what's going to happen to the real estate of their homes. They're drastically going to decrease. The city can take away the tax dollars that we also give.
I'm sorry. Let me just ask you, let me tell you.
Okay.
Planning Commission is not really involved with the decisions making decisions based on revenues, et cetera. Really what we're about is land use. So if you could confine your comments to what is the appropriate land use, and if you believe this measure would curtail appropriate land use, please tell us how.
Okay.
But the decisions on revenues and such really pertain more when the discussion is before City Council.
Okay, I'm just going to skip down exactly to that point. Commissioner Mack, you made an awesome comment earlier to fight for what we believe in. And Commissioner Murphy, you said something about what you made a decision and then 5 to 10 years down the road you wish you could have went back, or there was something about that statement. The land use that we have our bars and restaurants are to develop the friendships within the neighborhoods, to give amazing service to people on their first dates, to provide holidays, to give to charities. We are part of the neighborhood. We are like therapists to the people who have long days and want to come in for a drink. But all of these therapy sessions develop into friendships. None of this is on my notes, but the specific use of the land is to give back to the community. So it can't be just one-sided of what the homeowners are hearing. They have to hear both sides, and I am trying to be that common voice as a citizen in St. Thomas area and a business owner. The solution, I don't think, is to put an SUP. To enforce an SUP, I think the solution is to really support the UHA, because we're trying to do the greater good for both sides. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience today. My name is Naya Rodriguez. I reside at 1407 Main Street here in downtown. That being said, I chose to live in a urban city. So I'm very much aware of the noise level and the parking issues. I have a parking structure underneath our apartment building, and even at sometimes I find I have trouble finding parking there as a resident that I pay for. It seems to be that the city has a long history of imposing curfews or rezoning areas that are vibrant. I'll pull up a couple of examples. One of the biggest ones, West End. I remember growing up there as a kid, going down to the arcades, getting away from my parents for a while, and asking for $5, $10 to spend on tokens. And it was around for a good while. There was live music outside. It was loud. It was vibrant. Great energy. And then we started imposing curfews. No loitering. No cruising. And then it happened over Laura Greenville. Same thing. And then so what's happened with these areas is then they sit vacant for years. And then you have to, give tax breaks to get people back in. You had to do it in Laura Greenville too. And rather than start imposing curfews or rezoning, these areas that are vibrant and full of energy and bring in a lot of business, employ thousands of people, are great for tourism, which, let's be honest, our tourism isn't the greatest compared to Austin or San Antonio. But if we have a great entertainment district like West End, or if we keep building uptown, or we stick with what's working and just find ways to work with our community, we could build a better city. I own a restaurant on Cedar Springs, which would be affected directly by this curfew. I'm not open late. I'm a restaurant, but I count on that foot traffic that my surrounding bars and clubs bring me. That brings me the foot traffic and the exposure that I need to stay open and to get new customers. So as a city, we need to start looking, instead of our short-term solutions to these problems that can be easily solved, to long-term solutions. Because what's going to happen is, like some of the young lady mentioned, is we impose these curfews or we rezone these areas, and then businesses shutter, like it happened in West End. And then what happens to the real estate? What happens to the area? Then we had to start finding ways, creative ways to bring business back into Dallas. And look what happened to downtown Dallas with, where everyone was drawn out to the burbs Remember that in the 80s? And how long did downtown Dallas stay vacant? How many tax breaks have you had to give to all these developers in order to redevelop downtown Dallas? Because so many buildings are still empty downtown. And so, we're about land use. Okay, well, let's keep the land in use. Like the young lady said, bars are our local therapists. Restaurants are our local gatherings for family and friends. I invite people to hang out at my restaurant for hours. I have live music. So that's what we know. That's what restaurants and bars bring. They bring communities together. By imposing curfews that have them shutting down and lose a large portion of their revenue, then they shutter. And then they start laying off. And then what happens to all these employees, all these that lose their jobs? Where are they going to go? Then you have to relocate them to another area, and you have to start all over. How many times have we started over in Lower Greenville, Deep Ellum, West End, Bishop Arts? I grew up in Oak Cliff. I saw, I kind of whispered over to Jim, I'm kind of happy with what he's done in the area. I went to Adamson High School. First time I went to a restaurant in the Bishop Arts was in 1997, Vito's Italian. It was a great area back then, and I've seen it become what it is now. But if you start imposing curfews and changing, the rezoning too much, what's going to happen with all these restaurants that are vibrant? They bring in everybody from the neighborhood. Nova being a really good example. I love that restaurant. Everybody from the area goes there. I mean, at any given day in that restaurant, 80% of the people in there are regulars, are from the neighborhood. But if you impose those late night curfews, then it's, they're going to close. So it's not affected by this one, but case in point. So just take that into consideration. Don't start over again.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Next speaker, please.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Ed
I'd
Oakley.
like to recognize our former council member, Mr. Oakley. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Actually, I started out at ZOAC, and then I spent a lot of hours sitting right over one of these seats, right there when I started.
I'll bet you did.
So I know what you're going through. And I don't typically come down here because I paid my debt to society, and I thought I could retire.
But it's so much fun.
This subject is something that we addressed in PD 193 back in the 90s. And back then, and Mr. Young, you probably would remember, because I think you might have been on the Plan Commission when we opened up PD 193 to address several issues, and one of them was dance halls. And SUPs were required of dance halls. And in that, doing so, there used to be 2 or 3 dozen dance halls in the city in PD 193. Today, there may be a handful, 4 of which are on Cedar Springs, that have been there since the 70s. The rest of them, through attrition, property values have gone away. The city council saw in their infinite wisdom to take that and put that citywide, mainly because they were dealing with SOBs back then, and they were acting as dance halls. So they enacted that citywide. So what you're talking about here today is an overlay. Is dance halls already have to have an SUP. Bar, lounge, taverns, and alcohol uses everywhere but PD 193 have to have an SUP. Inside commercial amusement, billiard halls, all of these uses that were a problem created an SUP citywide, and most of them inside PD 193. The only thing that is allowed in PD 193 that's not, I'm talking in generalities, is the alcohol beverage establishment or bar is still allowed in PD 193. And when I looked up the zoning on some of these things on McKinney that I've heard the names of, 2 of those are restaurants, and 2 of them are alcohol beverage establishments. None of which the zoning overlay deals with parking, because the parking is the same for a restaurant or bar. So what are we doing here today? We're going to look at an ordinance that could be put over any place in the city of Dallas that would impact, as they did on Greenville, the Taco Cabana, the 7-Eleven, that have absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about. And I will tell you, on Greenville Avenue, which I live 2 blocks from, that was done because the property owners agreed to be self-imposed because they had a couple of business people that own the property that did not rein in their tenants. Cavan Enterprises is the person I've worked for 35 years. And part of the reason I ended up around this horseshoe because I wanted to solve that problem. We thought we had solved that problem. We also took, as a city council person, working with Laura Miller on our late hours, part of what's not being addressed here is some places are allowed to have late hours dance halls if they have a license to stay open till 4 o'clock. Which Cavan and some other property owners have today. So this overlay is going to doubly affect that group of people. Cavan, I will tell you, has 2 dance halls. Every year since it's been implemented, since I was on the council, Cavan has been granted a 2-year waiver. This last hearing, they asked, why are we only allowed to give them 2 years? Why can we not give them 4 so they don't have to come back? Because this is the way business owners should operate. The business owners on McKinney Avenue, 2 of them, one lives in Houston, of one of the businesses I looked up, one lives in Arlington. Why are they not down here testifying? Why are they not being reined in? Because the property owners are the ones that have the clout over the leases. If there are problems, we took the SAFE team that was used on apartments and we sent every department of the city out and looked at those, went into those places when they were open and did a review. And if there were problems, trust me, there are always problems if you're operating on a fringe or if you're operating things that are on the fringe of what should be legal. They will find it. And I guarantee you when you get the property owner that's got a piece of property on the tax rolls for $2 million sitting in a room across from the police department telling you if you don't get this reined in, we're going to shut you down. And you've got a use that's set up for that. What are you going to do with that use? So the tools are there, ladies and gentlemen. They're not being employed. They talk about this as and all due respect to the staff, this is not a tool in a toolbox. This is a jackhammer. This is going to affect business. What are you going to do if you came in on Bishop Arts and a neighborhood says, we want to put this over Bishop Arts. We like people coming over here. We want you to go back home by midnight. What are you going to do in West Dallas, where we some of the highest growth area that we have? We're talking about bringing Amazon into either Victory or into West Dallas. What are you going to do when the neighborhood comes in and says, hey, we want this overlay because we like them coming over here until midnight and we want them to go home? Are we going to roll up the sidewalks at midnight? That's what this ordinance will do. I predict that because the effect, go back and look at the history. The things that you put an SUP on are there for a reason, because we want to be able to rein them in and we want to shut them down. And that's exactly what this ordinance will do. And you will have the restaurants are the ones that are going to be caught up in this, not the bars. There's not that many bars left in the city of Dallas. Most of them are operating as restaurants. So ladies and gentlemen, if you want to roll the sidewalks up at midnight, pass this ordinance, and in 10 years, let's take a look at what we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Please, no expressions.
Arthur Hollingsworth, 1 Coventry Court, Dallas, Texas, and I'm here as a board member of Visit Dallas. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate all the young people taking a role in our city government. A lot of them had to leave, but thank you very much, and please keep that up. I'm against this overlay. The Visit Dallas is against this overlay, and I would term this overlay how to kill an urban renewal in one easy step. So take that in for a moment and think about 20, 30 years ago, the weekends in Dallas, the nights in Dallas, particularly downtown or uptown, you could fire a gun through there and no one would be hit. And I've had the privilege of serving as vice chairman of DART and as chairman of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and we have, for the citizens of the city, overseen billions of dollars of investment in the core of Dallas to make a downtown turnaround that's miraculous. And specific to turnarounds, you start an urban renewal with transit and with tourism and conventions. And speaking on behalf of Visit Dallas, I can tell you that prior to 10 years ago, the city had never had a convention booking year up to 1 million room nights. We are consistently booking 2 million room nights a year. Those conventioneers are spending huge amounts of dollars in this town, and when they go back to Philadelphia, you don't have to send them a fire truck. So they're very efficient from a tax base. That is the industry that we want to protect, and if conventioneers come here and they can't enjoy their time here, we are competing, keep in mind, with New York, Las Vegas, etc. New York says they are the city that never sleeps, and we're going to be the city that needs a Craftmatic bed to go to bed at midnight. So help us sell this city, help us bring those conventions in. Do not take this attack on urban development in the core of our downtown. Thank you very much for your time, and a special thank you for all these young people getting involved in our city governance.
Thank you, Mr. Hollingsworth. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Matthew Mabel. I live at 3914 Frontier Lane here in Dallas. I'm here on behalf of the Greater Dallas Restaurant Association. Before I start, I would like to ask everybody who's still here, who opposes the overlay, to please stand up. Thank you. And I think we all know it's Thursday night, which is one of the best nights to go out in Dallas and eat dinner. So we've lost about half of our crowd because they had to go to work and cook some food and serve it to some happy diners. I'm here on behalf of the Greater Dallas Restaurant Association to propose an alternative. We want to use current tools to identify and solve problems, and we want to model that on a process that's worked in the Deep Ellum Foundation. So what we suggest is a mission-based stakeholders group. Who are these stakeholders? We suggest that plan commissioners for 2, 5, and 14 participate. We suggest that we have balanced representation from the other stakeholders, homeowners, renters, businesses, commercial real estate owners. So that looks like the HOA, that looks like the apartment association, that looks like the hotel association, and of course, the Greater Dallas Restaurant Association. We'd like council persons, Medrano and Kingston, to participate. And we would also suggest that city department heads, police department, fire department, code, a representative from the city attorney's office participate. The mission of the stakeholders group would be to ensure safe, vibrant, and positive nighttime activity. Nobody is for the bad actors. We believe by bringing this team together, we can deal with the existing tools to take the bad actors out. It's not good for our city, and we know that. We want to clean up any problems that are out there while supporting a 24-hour economy of a modern city through coalition, consensus, and collaboration. That's what we propose. We want to thank you for understanding that this is an alternative to voting for what's in front of you. And it avoids the extreme problematic nature of the overlay that former Councilman Oakley articulated so well. We do want to solve these problems, and as the Greater Dallas Restaurant Association is formed, it's ready to take a leadership role to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Gabriela Matsoso, and I'm at 3030 Thomas Avenue, and I'm here representing the employees of Uptown. I'm actually a bartender at one of the establishments on McKinney Avenue. So neglecting the overlay isn't necessarily going to create jobs in Uptown. The jobs are already in place. And I'm just here to speak on the impact it'll have on us as employees and business owners. Passing the overlay would definitely be devastating for all of us because majority of the employees in Uptown, I can assure you, we've all made the life decision to move here to Dallas and come where the money is and be able to support our community by working and being able to support our lives and our families. And for those in school, we're able to do so by being employed in Uptown and being able to contribute. Anyway, sorry, I'm kind of shaking a little bit.
Take your time,
Okay.
You're doing fine.
All right, we're gonna try this again. This is a little scary. I didn't realize I'd be up here fighting for my job. Anyway, I believe we contribute to the economy operating bars and bartending can be overlooked simply because of the nature of the business. But I do definitely assure you that a lot of people are moving to Dallas. I mean, it's no brainer that Dallas is developing. And a lot of people moving to Dallas are especially attracted to the uptown area because they can not only reside there, but work not too far from there and also be able to go decompress after hours. And unfortunately, we're in the business in which we generate most of our revenue after hours. And majority of our clientele are your 9-to-5 jobs, people that are not going to bring us business during the day. Therefore, we're able to take care of them by being open those late hours. And we've actually put a lot of effort into the establishment to ensure the safety of our guests and our community. So for those that are saying that, the parking is an issue, you have a lot of people that do, like Commissioner Schultz was saying earlier, parking isn't necessarily an issue because you have a lot of people Ubering to uptown. So it's not necessarily taken away from those that reside in uptown. And we're also ensuring that we train our staff properly. We're doing by all the laws that are being put in place, TABC, we're enforcing that within our establishments so we can ensure the safety, once again, of the community. So I don't think necessarily being open 2 extra hours is going to have that big of an impact as far as taking away from the safety or taking away from the parking. It's literally just 2 hours. And for us, those 2 hours are what we depend on in order to bring in the revenue we need in order to pay our employees and support the lives that we lead every day. Also, I already mentioned this earlier, our demographic mostly consists of people that can't bring us business during those early hours. These are people that are going to come out late hours. And Lauren was saying earlier, McKinney Avenue is described as a vibrant community. If you put this overlay in place, can you imagine what people are going to be doing 5 to 10 years from now? Just like the gentleman was mentioning earlier, years ago, Dallas wasn't what it was today. The urban development, that's been a main attraction to even businesses and conferences, like someone else was saying earlier, that are coming into Dallas in order to not only develop themselves as a business, but also entertain while working on things that do matter. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Next speaker. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is James McDowell. I live at 1409 South Lamar at South Side on Lamar, 2 blocks away from Southside Ballroom, Gillies, Texas. And I oppose this overlay after hours simply because I'm a full-time Uber driver. So it's my job to actually get people home safely at 2 o'clock when they decide to leave the bars. But if you do it at the midnight, they're gonna leave their house about 9 or 10 and go have a couple beers or drinks and then get in their own cars and drive home. Right there, buzz driving is drunk driving. So that's why they take Uber and Lyft, okay? And another thing is American Airlines Center, when they have concerts and games, okay? AT&T Stadium, when the games end at 10:30, they're not gonna be able to get to the bars and enjoy the rest of their night, okay? They're gonna have to go home simply because there's not enough time to enjoy a Cowboys win, or enjoy Dallas Stars, the Dallas Mavericks win, okay? Or Texas Rangers, something like that. That's what's gonna hurt the economy, okay? And it's just, I'm sorry, but I'm never spoke in front of people like this before.
You're doing fine. You're doing very well.
And public speaking, I'm very shy.
You're doing great.
And the next thing is I moved here from Houston, Texas, September 1st, 2015, okay? I lived in Oaklawn on Throckmorton and Brown, okay? Now I live at Southside on Lamar, okay? I've seen people move here, okay, and how the economy has changed. You have State Farm, okay, Jamba Juice. Toyota moved their headquarters to Frisco. All these people are moving here because Dallas is Dallas. It's the next big thing in this country. And if you do this midnight overlay, you know how many people would not want to move here, simply because we're supposed to be one of the best nightlifes in the country. We have the best skyline in the world. And if you do this, it's just going to oppose everything what Dallas is for. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm last? Oh, I'm last. I'm going to make this quick. My name is Ken Benson. I'm here today representing the Hotel Association of North Texas. I appeared briefly before you last time, and I'll make this very quick. Our concerns about the ordinance are overlay number 3. Number 1, we think it's going to affect hotels differently, depending on how their certificate of occupancies are taken out. In the Uptown area, for instance, as we understand it, Hotel Zaza has a building occupancy permit, CO. They would not be impacted by the overlay. The Crescent, which has a dining room or dining restaurant, CO, would be impacted by the overlay. So our first concern is it's going to affect different hotel properties differently depending on the CO, which we understand is a basis for the ordinance. Secondly, we think it's going to affect the guest experience. We think that saying to a guest that they've got to leave a bar or you got to leave a dining room or even a banquet area at 12 o'clock, we think is going to hurt business for the hotels, particularly in the Uptown area. We think that that's unworkable. We know that it'll cost the hotels visitors. We know it'll cost meetings to those hotels that have that kind of regulation over them. And third, we're concerned about the effect of this being a citywide overlay. There are lots of areas of town that are under development right now. The design districts, Cedars, Southside, and Lamar. You look at where Dallas is growing and having a vibrant entertainment area, you are seeing that in the inner city. These overlays could be this overlay concept could be put in those areas as well. That could impact the hotel development in that area. It definitely will impact the entertainment value of that area. The hotel community is not the part of this problem, but we're part of the solution if you go to the overlay. And we're concerned about the impact it'll have on the hotel community. So we've urged you last time to go cautious on this, to look at possible impacts, to study it thoroughly. The Restaurant Association, we think, has a good first step solution to it. We agree totally with our friends at the Visit Dallas that we have become an entertainment city. People come to this city much more so than they did 10 years ago. The numbers of visitors and meetings and conventions we have coming to the city and staying in hotels has increased significantly by over 30%. And that's due in part to our ability to entertain people. So we would hope that you would urge caution and we would hope you will be cautious in moving forward on this. We have concerns about it, and we hope you'll address those concerns. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all, and I'm delighted we've stayed within our amount of time. Commissioners, are there any questions for Mr. Grooven, the sole speaker in support of the overlay? All right. Are there any questions for any of the folks who spoke in opposition? Okay. Any questions for Ms. Moore? Oh, Commissioner Peden.
I did have one question for, I believe it was Mr. Mabel.
Mr. Mabel?
Yes. I think I heard you say something about the overlay affecting for a 24-hour period. Did I misunderstand or mishear?
No, I'm sorry. Let me be clear. We talk about the 24-hour economy in this city and how we fear that the overlay would suppress that. Thanks for your question.
Commissioner Reeves?
Yes, I'd like to, I think it was Ken Betson, the last speaker for the hotel.
Mr. Betts?
Right here.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming down. Just wanted to clarify something. You said that this was an overlay that applied to the entire city. Can you explain to me what you think this overlay is about?
Oh, sure. Well, I meant that it could be applied in other areas of the city. I didn't mean the entire city would be an overlay. I meant it could be applied to other areas of the city, like the design district, like Cedars if the residents, like Mr. Oakley, suggested they came and wanted to deal with the noise issue by doing the overlay. I didn't mean it was a citywide overlay.
Just wanted to clarify what you were thinking. Thank you.
Commissioner Mack?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to open up a Pandora's box. I know we went to 30 minutes with the opposition, but there's a gentleman in blue right there. He's been here since the very beginning, and I think he was about to stand up and say something, but I don't know procedurally if that would then,
I was just going to be real quick. My name's Wes Howard. I'm at 900 Jackson Street.
Hold on just a second. Let me direct that to the chair to make sure that's okay. I don't know if that's possible, but
I'll make the motion to extend both sides by a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll be very quick.
Thank you. All those in favor of extending by a minute?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Yes, sir.
My name's Wes Howard. I'm 900 Jackson Street. I've been in Dallas since I was 4th grade, something like that, and I ended up going to TCU, close by enough to Dallas-Fort Worth area. a lot of people came here after college, and first place they look is uptown. A lot of my friends, they work in Las Colinas, work in Garland, work in, I don't know where, not in Dallas, but they choose to live in uptown and that area and surrounding area just to be there. They'll commute over an hour just to be in that area and really enjoy the nightlife and everything like that, and they just really love Dallas. And they are from California, and they came to college here. I met a few people from UNT even, and Denton, and they work out in Denton and choose to live in Dallas still. So that really says something to me about how important the nightlife is for the younger crowd. I'm 25 years old, under 30, and a lot of people in that area are in my demographic, I would say, and they still choose to live there. And so a lot of people, and I know right behind me, I guess, but a lot of people just choose to live here for that reason. And I don't personally live in Uptown. I live in the Design District, but close enough to downtown so I can get to work here every day, and then go out and have a good time. So I just hope that we keep it open and let more people come in and don't turn young people away, because that's driving force of the economy, I think. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. We gave an additional minute to both sides. I know we only had one speaker in support. Do you have anything you want to say to use that, the 1 minute?
I'd like to say that I do appreciate...
Please hold on until you come to the microphone so we can have it on the record.
I'd like to say I do appreciate...
Into the microphone.
I'd like to say that I do appreciate the efforts that the restaurants have made on McKinney to increase police presence, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is, the issue has been raised. We want to have a city that never sleeps. I'd also like to have a city that never gets falling down drunk and passes out. And
Point
that's
taken.
the problem. In other words, despite these efforts, we're still having a lot of difficulty. There's not sufficient enforcement, and I despair at this point that there ever will be. And I guess the only other thing is that people are talking as if Dallas was a sleepy town until 10 years ago. I came here 50 years ago, and it was growing like crazy. And that's why it's such a larger place than it is. Than it was. This place isn't going to shrink up just because you have to close the bar at midnight, and I know that because it used to be like that.
Thank you. All right, commissioners, questions for Ms. Moore? Oh, Commissioner Shadid,
I do have
apologize.
a question for Mr. Oakley.
Mr. Oakley. My apologies, Commissioner. I had not realized you were on the board.
I just thought of it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Oakley, you mentioned Save Team in your comments, and I'm hoping that you can give us more insight into this. I had never heard the term before. Could you educate us, please?
It was in effect when I was on the city council, and I assume the staff, I don't know if they shake their head yes or no, that there is such a thing as a Safe Team, and the Safe Team included people from the lawyers, but every department, building inspection, code compliance, fire department, they'd bring TABC in, Vice, all those agencies that you sign off on when you get a certificate of occupancy that have inspected that building. They may bring the plumbing inspector, they may bring the electrical inspector, and they literally would go into these establishments. Sometimes they started out as apartments, but we used it effectively on some of these nightclubs that were a problem back in the 90s. They would literally go in, they'd make notes, and if there were real violations, they would bring the operator and the property owner into the table. And I remember going to a meeting once, and it was held over at the old police station. And if you don't think that doesn't get people's attention when they're brought in and sit down and say, well, here are the code violations that we found. Here's these violations. Your doors were chained, and this was, and I guarantee you can go into most any business and find violations. I dealt with the fire marshal the last 2 nights, and even though I've been there 30 years and I built them, she can still find things that need to be fixed.
Sounds like it was a full court press.
It was a full court press for properties that became a nuisance on the city and a blight on the city.
And how was that process initiated?
Well, I think the council put it together, and I don't know if it still is in effect. I don't see anybody shaking their head at whether it is or isn't. I don't know if it is or isn't.
We will ask. Thank you, Mr. Oakley.
Thank you. It was very effective, but I'll tell you, when you get people from California had to fly in to go to a meeting because their apartment complex was out of control or whatever it was.
Commissioner Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mabel, may I ask you a question, please? And I'll make this quick. I know it's late. I was on the record at the ZOAC meeting for endorsing the Greater Dallas Restaurant Association's suggestion to engage in a collaborative process between businesses and neighbors to address any real and/or perceived issues with regard to late-night hours establishment. So I think that's a fine idea. Something has come to my attention since I made that statement, and I want to ask you what you know about it. Have you ever heard of a practice by restaurants whereby they rent out their space after they've completed their food service to like a third-party group that'll bring in a DJ?
I have not heard of that, renting out to a third party for a DJ. No, I haven't.
Okay. It's kind of come to my attention that is a practice that some restaurants are engaging in. And so if such a group is indeed formed, I'd like to encourage you guys to look over that practice, which I understand is now called a takeover. So some third party comes in, and I can see a few of you nodding, you know what I'm talking about. They come in and they take over the restaurant. They open it, they bring in a DJ, they put down a dance floor, and I'll ask staff about that next. But if indeed you do form such a coalition, I would like you guys to examine what I believe is called a takeover situation.
Absolutely, we'd be happy to examine that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mack?
Just really quickly for Commissioner Shadid, the SAFE's an acronym that stands for Support, Abatement, Forfeiture, Enforcement. We've used them in our neighborhood for derelict properties that the property owner may live way outside the city, but there's squatters living there, and it's just a coordination between the community prosecutor and the code compliance and police, and they just help make sure that issues are followed up with in a timely fashion. But they've been really helpful in my own neighborhood personally.
Thank you, Commissioner Mack. Commissioner Reeves?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question to survey the crowd. We've heard from the Greater Dallas Restaurant Association, the hotel organization. I've heard of restaurant or bar owners. We've heard of some wait staff. Is anybody here that's actually a landlord that leases to a restaurant or a bar in the crowd? And a landowner? So we have two. Oh, property, and you're the landlord. Thank you. I just wondered, and Mr. Hetzel, yes. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the opposition to the measure? Okay, questions for Ms. Moorman, commissioners, or for staff generally? All right, Commissioner Murphy.
Yes, Ms. Moorman, quickly. So if a restaurant does lease to a third party to come in and rent the property after hours, I mean, is that permissible? And if they allow dancing, is that permissible?
I'm going to defer to counsel.
If a restaurant has a CO for restaurant, they have to operate a restaurant. It has to be the operator that is listed on the CO.
Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Reeves, question for staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Moorman, with this tool, we could if we decided to do one of these overlays in a specific area, we have to go through the public process. There has to be hearings. We survey the property. Can you describe what would actually happen if I said this block right here I think deserves an overlay? Can you briefly explain what would happen?
Yes, it would be, first of all, an area would be defined, and City Council could request an authorized hearing to look into this. And at that point in time, if council agreed, then staff would take it on as a zoning case, and it would go through the public hearing process. So it would go through development. Staff would bring it to City Planning Commission, and then from City Planning Commission, it would go on to City Council.
Okay, thank you. One quick follow-up?
Sure.
Thank you. With this overlay tool, when we went through that process, could we also look at appending other things with this? So if we said we want to put this overlay here, we authorize a public hearing, could we also say, well, we really have a parking problem here. We want to address that too. or we have too many outdoor speakers, we want to address that. Could you do that within this overlay?
No, this overlay would be specifically for late hours establishment.
Okay, so, but we do have a PD in Deep Ellum, for example, where you have to have an SUP to have a bar. If anybody that sells more than 75% of their revenue is alcohol sales, they have to have an SUP to be open. So we could still, even though we could not pass this today, we could still come in at some point via a CPC hearing or a city council hearing and actually open up a planned district to do the same type of thing in an area that we so thought may or may not need it.
So yes, an authorized hearing could be called to look at an area to create a planned development district that would create this use that would have those requirements.
And could we also look at parking potentially there, or patios, or late night speakers if we actually opened up a PD and started going that route?
If you were looking at the zoning, yes.
Okay, so this is kind of a surgical tool where we still have a much bigger hammer potentially if things got out of hand and we went the PD route.
I'm sorry, ask that again.
The PD route could take this late night overlay and actually do even more with it potentially.
Yes, if an authorized hearing was called and you were looking at the zoning to determine the proper zoning for an area, you've opened up everything. You've opened up all the regulations, yard, lot, space, height, parking, uses.
Commissioner Ridley.
Ms. Moorman, is there anything in this proposed amendment to authorize the creation of overlay districts that would create a curfew preventing citizens from leaving their homes after midnight?
No.
Is there anything in this proposed amendment that even if an overlay district was subsequently created that would bar any business from being open after midnight in that overlay district?
No.
Is there anything in this ordinance that would apply to in any way restrict the operation of an existing business wishing to stay open after midnight?
So if an overlay went into place in an area and a late hours establishment use, they would be required to come in and request an SUP.
Chair, that is incorrect. Yes. It would just create a non-conformity. The existing uses would not come in for an SUP.
Thank you, Mr. Vandenberg.
So, in other words, any existing business with employees that's currently operating would not be subject to this new ordinance?
No, it becomes a non-conforming use.
All right. It would only be future businesses that wish to start operating after an overlay district was established that would be required to obtain an SUP.
If they're operating between 12 and 6 a.m., yes.
Correct. And even if that were the case, those businesses could still operate after 12, provided that they obtain an SUP.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schultz.
Ms. Moorman, is in the current code, if there's an area that's a significant problem that this overlay addresses, is there any tool now in the current code other than an entire PD for a district that enables a community to say we want a late hours establishments only by SUP?
No, it would be through a zoning change, zoning district.
So if a neighborhood wanted to do that, however, they could ask for an authorized hearing and do their neighborhood. Is that correct?
So
it would be their district.
It could be an authorized hearing could be requested to look at an area for determination of zoning by City Plan Commission or City Council.
Thank you. And could you also share with me what is the citywide problem that we're addressing this at a citywide level rather than areas by areas?
So, and The overlay, the proposal that's in front of you, the overlay itself would be a tool in the development code to be used when city council looked at an area, if they chose, and asked for a public hearing, an authorized hearing, to overlay an area with this use. And it would overlay the base zoning only in the area that is proposed by the authorized hearing.
But they can do that now through zoning, right? I'm trying to understand why we're doing something citywide when, as opposed to district by district.
So this is not citywide. It's a tool to sit that could be used in any area of the city. It's not applied over the city currently.
Commissioner Ridley, I believe your light is still on. Commissioner Young.
Let me piggyback on some of Commissioner Ridley's questions. Assuming that we were to pass this and the City Council were likewise to pass it, but before anything else happened, which areas of the city would have a requirement for an SUP after midnight?
I'm sorry, you're asking if before this passed?
I'm asking, this passes City Council, the ordinance we have before us today, but nothing else has yet happened. Which areas of the city would have to get an SUP after midnight?
None.
And what would have...
Commissioner, Greenville would still.
Well, Greenville,
is the
because
one
it
area.
has its own PD.
Yes, I'm sorry.
All right. And if this were proposed for a particular area of the city, I'll pick uptown just as an example, and the judgment of this commission and then ultimately the judgment of the City Council was that it was an unwise idea to put an overlay on that area, and they turned it down, would it have any effect on the businesses in those areas and the requirement for them to get an SUP?
No.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shadid.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarification for Council, Mr. Vanderberg. Once an overlay is established, does a bar have to close at midnight, or can it stay open past midnight and not sell alcohol?
Madam Chair, to answer the Commissioner's question, if the overlay was put in place on any particular block, whatever personal service or retail business on that block or similar, depending if it's Chapter 51, would be required to close between 12 and I think it's 6 without an SUP. That would include the 7-Eleven, the bank, I don't know what else, but basically everything.
So just to be clear, I think we heard something different before. A bar would be required to close at midnight. It would not be able to stay open even if they stop selling alcohol.
That is absolutely correct. Again, so would a bank, so would anything else.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Schultz.
Yeah, this is a question also for a ZOAC question. When we decided that accessory dwelling units were not appropriate to do citywide, even though some neighborhoods wanted them, did we do it because it was like imposing something on the entire city when it was particular to certain neighborhoods?
That proposal was for an overlay as well.
Thank you.
All right, no further questions. Commissioner Shadid, do you have a motion?
I do. And if I have a second, I have a comment. In the matter of DCA 156009, I move to close the public hearing. I think I read the right one. And not follow staff recommendation for approval, but rather follow ZOAC recommendation of no change.
Thank you, Commissioner Shadid. Thank you, Commissioner Murphy, for your second in DCA 156-009. Commissioner Shadid, do you have comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you. We did have an opportunity to first review this issue at ZOAC. And we began by identifying the goal of the ordinance, which is to help deal with 3 issues: parking, noise, and crime. After careful consideration and study, I just cannot agree that establishing a late-night overlay is an effective and direct way of dealing with these issues. These are very real problems which are best dealt with through enforcement. The City of Dallas already has the tools to deal with these issues. The city must commit the resources necessary to fully implement enforcement efforts. Also, for a moment, let's consider how this process may play out. After establishing a late-night overlay, all personal service uses that stay open past midnight must go through the process to receive an SUP. Personal service uses include bars and restaurants, and also businesses such as Walgreens, CVS, Gold's Gym, and potentially some service stations. Until these businesses go through the SUP process, they are considered non-conforming. This can be problematic. A non-conforming user on a property hurts its value, its marketability, and the ability of the owners to borrow money. In short, it's no small thing to have a non-conforming tenant or building. Currently, in most of Dallas, bars and clubs must go through an SUP process. This is a process that is open for public input and requires the applicant to eventually come back for a renewal. This process has worked well in the past to put bad operators on notice, as the renewal is not guaranteed. In fact, this body has denied renewals in the past. Establishing a late-on overlay in these areas would require all of these businesses that stay open past midnight to go back through the process for an additional SUP. This would be simply redundant. There are a few areas in Dallas where bars and clubs are allowed by right, and therefore do not go through the SUP process. A late-night overlay, again, would require all personal service uses that stay open past midnight to go through the SUP process. In these areas, bad operators that are denied an SUP would not be closed down, but rather not allowed to operate past midnight. Not supporting a late-night overlay does not mean that we don't recognize the problem. However, a bad operator remains a bad operator regardless of whether they close at midnight or at 2 a.m. Regardless of the results of the vote today, these problems will need to be addressed in a direct and thoughtful manner. I hope that a partnership can be formed between industry, the community, and the City of Dallas. I know Mr. Oakley, Mr. Mabel, and others have expressed a willingness to work with the stakeholders to explore possible solutions. I think the question today is this: do the limited benefits of a late-night overlay outweigh the various negative consequences that will affect business, property owners, and potentially an important industry? In my view, they do not, and therefore a motion of no change. I hope you can support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Shadid. With Commissioner Mack's permission, I'm going to leapfrog and jump in here. I will definitely be supporting the motion, and I hope the rest of our colleagues will as well. And I have a variety of concerns that have arisen through this whole project. I think it is first and foremost addressing a problem or a series of problems, because there certainly are problems with noise, with parking, with disorderly conduct, but it's seeking to address identified problems in potentially identified areas with a global approach that is extreme overkill, in my opinion. I think we have the existing tools. We spent extensive time hearing from folks from the parking department as to what the various tools are that are in place already to potentially assist neighbors who are being overrun with scofflaws for the parking ordinances. We have noise ordinances. There are a lot of things the city can do if the city has the will to do it. And citizens are in a place where they can trigger that result from the city with sufficient complaint, with sufficient concern being expressed, and I think that's important. And I hope that an example of the folks who came out here today to express their views on something could be echoed by those folks who feel they are suffering because of some of these problems. But we have tools. Whether they are actively being used or not by the city is a different question, but we have tools. And I am philosophically very concerned with using a major jackhammer to address what is a very limited series of problems. And I understand the point of the questions of Commissioners Young and Commissioner Ridley about the impact that this would have, technically speaking, if it were passed, but before there were a particular action taken on it. But I think there is a broader view. There is a chilling effect that takes place when a city indicates a disposition to shut down an industry or to potentially severely shut down an industry. A lot of the decisions being made by businesses coming to a city Amazon being the most recent example, I know nothing of the Amazon decision-making process, but something like this that might be passed, even without any further action happening, could very logically lead them to think this may be a less vital city than we would want to bring our employee base to. I think it is short-sighted in the extreme. I think this is a measure that was blown way out of proportion. Council districts that may have specific spot problem areas can address those issues. We have CPC members who can call an authorized hearing. We have council members who can call an authorized hearing to deal with specific problems, big or small of an area. We can deal with that. This is extreme overkill, and I feel very strongly this measure should not pass. So with my apologies to Commissioner Mack, I will now turn over to him, but I wanted to share that at the outset. Commissioner Mack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will be supporting the motion made by Commissioner Shadid. To steal a phrase, I guess, from our colleagues over here, it seemed like a 2-ton tool box or 2-ton tool for a 5-pound problem. I just didn't think an overlay was the right way to go when there's really nothing prohibiting a neighborhood from doing this through amending a PD, creating a PD. There's several tools that could be used to achieve the same end. And then likewise, I just wanted to call, should this motion pass and then pass through council, I just wanted to call on all of our colleagues to remember to keep in mind how important our careful deliberation is through the SUP process, and even establishments that may not be termed bars or restaurants or taverns, but those that stay open late, during late hours, like, dance halls. You bring up a very good point, Commissioner Murphy, but that really is what the citizens of Dallas are relying on us to use as the appropriate enforcement mechanism to make sure that they can still have a voice in ensuring that development is compatible and complements what they want to see in their neighborhood. So I will be in full support of the motion made by Commissioner Shadid.
Commissioner Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, will be supporting the motion, and I'd like to commend Commissioner Shadid for his leadership at ZOAC. We went through several hearings. They were very thoughtful and comprehensive, and the deliberations of the ZOAC team was impressive. I'd like to recognize Mr. Chad Benedict, who walked in to listen to this. He's a member of the ZOAC commission team, and so they were really thoughtful about this, and that was the same conclusion that committee came to. So I want to echo Commissioner Shadid's point and say one other thing from a more philosophical point of view, and that is when there are problems, there are several ways to approach a problem. And one way is top down. Cram down a new regulation. Lay down the law. And the other is grassroots, bottom up. So from my perspective, we have two ways to approach it from the bottom up method. Number one, encourage the city to enforce as allowed pursuant to the myriad of tools it has. They've got to enforce. And if they can't enforce, we've got to encourage our council members to allocate resources so that enforcement can occur. Second, your community is strong. And even though half of your community has walked out, it is still very strong. And it's got good leadership. You guys as a community need to come together and make sure that you're operating as a good citizen, because you operate in neighborhoods and you need to be good neighbors. I'd also like to encourage that organization that you may put together, that collaborative effort, include more than just Councilmember Medrano and Kingston. It should be a little bit broader. So I will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Peden.
In a way, I'd like to echo some of the things that Commissioner Murphy just said. And I don't think you accomplish anything by using a Gestapo-type technique. I think it's far better. I heard Councilman Oakley, and I believe it was Mr. Mabel, or I could have the wrong person there, because my notes are all scattered now. But you mentioned this commission you were talking about putting together, as Commissioner Murphy referred to. I would challenge you, get that in place, because I think that's the most effective tool you have at enforcing. Self-enforcement is always much better than somebody coming in and trying to cram something down your throat. It's more effective. You know what you need to do. You can do it far better than we could by legislating. You have to do it our way. I'm so in awe because I've seen this work so well in other areas. And the police department also has SAFE. In our neighborhood, we have some things up in far north Dallas, believe it or not, where we also have some issues. But it's up to the people that live in that area to get the enforcement, the owners, the operators, the people. I mean, it's your business. It's your livelihood. You're much better at enforcing those things than we could ever hope to be. So I would really challenge you to put together that organization you mentioned and move it forward. Thank you so much for staying with us tonight. I really appreciate your patience and endurance.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Believe it or not, I will actually be supporting this motion. And I was there for the Lois Greenville SUP. And I will say, I think if Amazon would have shown up at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. down on Lois Greenville, they would have turned and run the other way. When you're having brawls, gang brawls in the middle of the street at 1:30, and I've got friends telling me, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe, good gosh, well, no one goes there. And then we go through the drought where no one makes any money. And everybody, the property owners aren't making money, the landlords aren't making money, the owners no one's making money, everyone just picks up and moves, and it's just desolate. It happened in the West End, it happened in Lois Greenville, it's happened in Deep Ellum a couple of times. Deep Ellum has risen like the phoenix from the dead a couple of times now. But the big difference that I see now in Deep Ellum is that I got to attend a meeting, and I've had some with Randall White, who Commissioner Shadid and I met with. And I said, one of the things that really impressed me about Deep Ellum is that they have a foundation, and it is the landowners. And when I asked the landowners to stand up, there are two here. And I don't know if that's good or bad, because, and I also disagree with some of the commissioners we've heard, this overlay is actually a surgical tool. You know exactly what it is. And the path of least resistance would be to take this surgical knife. If we don't have that tool, then they're going to then someone could try to put a planned district, open up, if you're already in a planned district, open it up, or put one on top of you. And then anything is on the table. We're not talking about getting an SUP to be open after midnight. We're talking parking is can be discussed. We're talking music can be discussed. Where types of uses can be discussed. This is actually a surgical tool. What you don't want is the other. So I am encouraged by the Restaurant Association, and I'm hearing people, with a willingness to do something. I was dismayed when I went to both public hearings, and the general consensus by far was basically, well, when they're inside my doors, they're my problem, but as soon as they go out those doors, they're not my problem. I heard one gentleman of the tens of people, 60, 70, 80 people who spoke, I heard one gentleman say, hey guys, when they leave our door, we are responsible for them. And I realize people take Uber now, but when people take Uber, they'll also tend to drink a little bit more. I think we'll end up serving them. I've said at the bar, I live a block and a half from Greenville Avenue. If I'm going to go out with my wife and I'm going to have a couple of drinks, I'll have two over 2 hours and drive home. If I'm going out with my buddies and I'm walking up the street, it might be a little bit more than two because I'm walking home. So so there's a responsibility not to overserve just because someone walked or someone took Uber. There's a responsibility, especially from the property owner. So you think about this, a PD could be put in an area. Look around. If the property owners all of a sudden want to say, we're sick of this bad operator, the property owners can get together and do it. The property owners did it in Deep Ellum. The property owners did it in Lois Greenville. So it is everyone's responsibility. I'm encouraged, I will do whatever I can to help. I never liked the Lois Greenville PD. I'd never liked it, but I completely supported it, and I stood right there and fought for it because it got so bad, that's where we had to end up going. Because we had people dying in the streets because you looked at my girlfriend wrong, and everybody was just kind of going the other way. Well, what I have seen with the Deep Ellum Foundation is that we met in Councilman Medrano's office, we had property owners, we had business owners, we had wait staff. There was a consistent team effort to address that. Councilman Medrano had the fire chief there, he had the police there, he had all these different things. And when we went away with, oh, we can look at this, the fire marshal can look at this, we can look at this. But where it started was the people that were there actually speaking out, because that did not happen on Lois Greenville. The property owners, the bar owners that were bad, the other good ones who were getting hurt never spoke out against them. And we ended up with a PD. So I'm not going to support this, but be careful. You might get what you really don't want.
Thank you, Commissioner Reeves. Commissioner Ridley.
I will not support the motion because I think this would provide a valuable tool to restrain the excesses of areas of the city that operate at late hours. There has been an egregious disinformation campaign that has led to huge misconceptions of the public as to what this ordinance would provide. There's this notion that this would create a citywide curfew preventing people from leaving their homes after midnight. That is nothing anywhere close to the truth. This would not create any kind of a curfew. There is also a notion that this would put every bar in the city that operates after midnight out of business. That is also not true. This would have, passing this today will not prevent any bar from staying open after midnight. That would require a creation of a district overlay after an authorized hearing, which would also allow public input before it was created. And even if an overlay district were created, it would still allow late night operation with an SUP. So it would not be an automatic prevention of any late night business. It would only prevent irresponsible operation in the late night hours because of the standards to obtain an SUP. This ordinance is directed not at the responsible operators, who I suspect are in the audience today, but those who are irresponsible, who overserve, who don't restrain violence either in or immediately outside of their establishments in the late night hours. There are no similar tools in the city's toolbox today that would prevent the excesses that we have seen in certain areas of the city. Yes, we did hear from parking operations about the efficacy of RPO districts that restrict parking in areas near bars to residents only. And I came away with a very clear conclusion that that was no restriction at all because it is not enforced after 10 o'clock at night. The other issue here is that this would not affect any currently operating business. Because they have the right created by their existing use to continue that use in light of this new legislation, even if an overlay district was created, it would not affect any currently operating business. Also, if voluntary measures were so effective, as we heard many speakers claim, then why do we have the problem today? I have heard of no mechanism by which current operators or the industry leaders can induce bad operators from ceasing operation. There's no mechanism to do that. That has to be by regulation. The greatest reason for adopting this amendment is the example of the Lower Greenville late night hours overlay, which has been a tremendous success. It has cleaned up the excesses on Lower Greenville. It has reduced crime there multiples of the citywide rates of crime reduction. It has not put bars out of business operating after midnight on Greenville, as anyone who goes by Lower Greenville after midnight can attest to. It has not put people out of business except those people who didn't respect their neighbors and who operated irresponsibly and who couldn't meet the standards that are required to obtain an SUP. Those that didn't are few and far between. We approve the vast majority of SUP late night hours extensions, renewals along Greenville Avenue because we have that tool in the toolbox. And that is what chills the current businesses from being lax about over-serving and about allowing violence in their clubs. Without that tool, we could go back to the Wild West that we had on Lower Greenville before 2011. And I think as a result, this is a tool which hopefully we won't need to use, but we have to have it in existence for it to create that effective tool.
Commissioner Young.
I agree completely with Commissioner Ridley's comments, and I'll try not to repeat them. Continuing with the toolbox analogy, we're told, why should we buy an extra tool when we already have tools in our toolbox? I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the tools we have in our toolbox are rusted and dull. And anyone who says that they're not, I think, is naively inexperienced at the actual practical realities of protecting a neighborhood from obnoxious adjoining businesses. The Greenville Avenue residents and the Greenville Avenue businesses, who are as far from novices at the process of protecting themselves as you can get, realized that the existing tools in the toolbox were not adequate to solve their problems. And they invented, through the form of a PD, the late night overlay. I can assure you they would not have done that if they thought there was any practical alternative already in the toolbox. We're told that parking enforcement is a tool. We heard from the director of parking enforcement about how rusty and dull that tool really is. And if you don't mind getting a ticket occasionally and paying it, you can get away with murder in terms of parking in a resident-only parking area. There is no towing unless you're blocking the street or creating a safety hazard, or unless you have multiple unpaid citations. Apart from that, there is no parking enforcement. I have heard groups say for 30 years, we don't need the XYZ ordinance, we just need to enforce the existing ordinances we have on the books. If code enforcement were capable of doing that, if code enforcement had the will to do that, that would be one thing, but we have 30 years of experience that they don't. The second thing we're told is we shouldn't get a new tool because we might misuse it. We might buy that chainsaw at Home Depot to prune off the bad bars in a particular area, and then might go berserk and clear cut our entire lot. We might shut down the convention business in Dallas. We might turn Dallas into a late night wasteland. I, for one, trust this commission, and I trust the city council not to do that. You're not going to see this ordinance be applied willy-nilly throughout the city. If it is proposed for Bishop Arts, and that's a bad idea, I trust the council to say it's a bad idea. If it is proposed for Uptown, and those who come down and say it's a good idea say their piece, and those who come down and say it's a bad idea say their piece, I trust the commission and the council to make the right decision on that one as well. And the final thing we're told is that even having this tool in our toolbox will have a chilling effect. People will say, oh, I don't want to deal with him. He's got a chainsaw in his toolbox. I would point you to the city of San Jose, California, which has a citywide late-night overlay. Every business in the city between 12 and 6, other than office uses in a commercial district, has to get a conditional use permit. And I submit to you that hasn't stunted their growth very badly. Finally, the alternative to this tool, as Commissioner Reeves has pointed out, could be far worse. If all we have in our toolbox is some dull handsaws, and we didn't buy that chainsaw at Home Depot, we may have to use the dynamite. We may have to call a public hearing to completely open up the zoning in a particular area. And at that point, people are going to be at risk of far more than a late-night overlay. This may never be used. I hope it's never used. It may be used once. It is a valuable tool to have. It is better than the alternative of calling a general public hearing to determine proper zoning, and so I will not be supporting the motion.
Commissioner Housewright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I'd been on the commission long enough to know not to push my button after Mr. Young, but and did have to follow his remarks, which are always very well reasoned. Nevertheless, I'm going to support this motion. I want to thank Commissioner Shadid for his leadership on ZOAC and for his very well-reasoned statement earlier. I don't think it's the duty of this body to regulate behavior of customers or how people manage their businesses. I feel like that is for other bodies in this city to undertake. If our tools are ineffective, I would suggest that we need to clean the tools and sharpen the tools. I really resist additional regulation when it just doesn't seem necessary. I think we've got all the regulation that we need in this city. I really resist any parallels and discussion about how we need to be like Amsterdam, New York City, San Francisco, or San Jose, all of whom I think are not who we are. I think the thing that causes me to continue to be firm in my opposition to this is just that I think there's any number of unintended consequences to this ordinance, things that we just can't see. And I really appreciated Chairwoman Tarpley's remark about the chilling effect of something that we very likely might not even use. But I don't see why we would put something in our toolbox that then we wouldn't turn around and use. So I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Commissioner Anglin.
Yes, I'll be supporting the motion also, mainly because I appreciate the job that ZOAC did, and I watched it from the audience, and I think they got it right. Technically speaking, though, I wanted to make one comment that several of the commissioners have made the mistake of suggesting that opening a case for the review of zoning to establish a new overlay cannot be limited in its subject matter. It absolutely can be. We did it last month in Bishop Davis, where we opened up a sub-district, and we said that we are limiting the issues only to the form, placement, and basing of the structures. No examination of use is possible. So we do have that ability to open up a limited case of late hours only, and that we will, if that's what the public hearing, the called hearing, is confined to, then that's what it will be. And you guys will all have the ability to experience that when you have to take up the Bishop Davis review, because you'll be limited in the issues that you can actually adjust in that.
Thank you, Commissioner Anglin. I completely agree, and I wanted to just follow up on precisely the point Commissioner Housewright made, which is I completely agree with Commissioner Young that we have rusty tools that are not being enforced. Absolutely we do, and shame on us as a city. I think it's really perturbing when you tell neighbors that we are going to enforce towing if people are parked in front of your homes late at night, and then we do nothing about it because of a quiet internal policy. I think that has to stop. But this is a case of you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You don't overkill. You address the issues with the tools you have. Just because you have a tool that's slightly rusty, you don't toss it. You sharpen it, you use it, and you move forward. I think, as Commissioner Anglin noted, we can tailor a much more limited opening of a PD or creation of a PD if need be. And frankly, if we have an egregious set of circumstances, I would not have an objection to opening it wide if you have a problem that necessitates it. This is all a matter of judgment, but to go through and tell the world Dallas is really looking at shutting the doors to a lot of its nightlife, to me is very dangerous. It sends the wrong message, and it does nothing to fix the problems that we have in place. Further comments? Commissioner Reeves.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just one really thing. I realize that we can limit a PD, but we can also not limit the PD. We can also add in parking and speakers and operations. So yes, we can, but we can also choose not to.
Sure. Commissioner Shadid.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And continuing with our analogy of the tool in the toolbox, yes, this would be a tool, but in my opinion, it would be a tool that just simply will not work. And as I said in my comments before, applying a late night overlay over an area where bars and restaurants already receive an SUP would offer zero. A bad operator that has gone through the SUP process must get a renewal. And when they do, they must come back to this body. And on the other side, for bars that do not receive SUPs, this overlay would only prevent them from selling alcohol past midnight. It would not shut them down. So this is, again, a defective tool that is not going to accomplish what we think it will accomplish. Number two, Commissioner Young is absolutely right. The residential parking only program clearly needs to be overhauled. I was not at the special session where we heard from those folks, but I did have the opportunity to hear the session, and clearly it is undermanned and underfunded. And lastly, I think Commissioner Reeves is absolutely right. I think now is the moment for you folks to act and get creative and inclusive in finding a solution, because we don't want to be opening up PDs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Young.
It's very late, and I know how the vote's going to go, so I'll be very brief. With respect to Commissioner Shadid's comment that this is a broken tool and won't work, I'm reminded of Mark Twain's comment when someone asked him if he believed in baptism. And his response was, "Oh yes, I've seen it done." And I'm here to say I've seen it done. As Commissioner Ridley pointed out, a late hours overlay has been a very effective component of turning Lower Greenville around. And the potential exists for it to do likewise in other areas.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll go ahead and take a recorded vote, ladies and gentlemen, in DCA 156-009, motion by Commissioner Shadid, seconded by Commissioner Murphy, to not follow staff's recommendation of approval, but rather to deny consistent and have put no change in the ordinances in the city, in complete agreement with the decision reached by the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee. If you are in support of the motion, vote yes, otherwise vote no. Motion passes. Voting yes, Commissioners Anglin, Mack, Housewright, Murphy, Peden, Reeves, Schultz, Shadid, and Tarpley. Voting no, Commissioners Young and Ridley. Motion does not pass. Motion passes, ordinance does not. Thank you all. Thank you all. If y'all don't mind, we'd appreciate your exiting somewhat quietly. Those of you who have not filled out the yellow forms, please do. Thank you for spending a long day with us, and we still have business to do, but we wish you well as you go on your way, and thank you. Commissioners, we have a couple of other...
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from 2X Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.